All right, so we're working on a Porsche Cayenne S, and we're doing the hood here. What we're gonna do is a 4-corner tack and then squeegee everything out. There's a couple things that are a little special on this one because the hood tends to rest a little bit low from the fender, and that creates a couple, just a little issue you need to pay attention to. And let's get started. So normally on hoods like this, if I'm having an issue with this area not wanting to stay down, what I'll do is put like a rag underneath the hood, and it'll give the hood a little bit of a, you put it underneath the hinge on there, and it'll put a little bit of lift on the hood when you close it. This one is, the hinge doesn't have much wiggle room, so there's not much play in it. So I wasn't able to do that. If the fender sits taller than the hood, it's gonna wanna pull that material off of the hood, and if that happens, you're gonna get a lift line. So we need to pay attention to that and make that not a problem. All right, so we're gonna put a little bit of stretch from left to right, and we're gonna tack this down on the fender, not on the hood, because now we're gonna stretch, and we don't want any stretch marks in the adhesive on top of the hood. So we tack to the fender, and then here we're gonna tack to the bumper, again to the bumper. Something else to note about Porsches is that you don't want the material to really tack to the headlight. It's actually a good idea when you're doing Porsches to do the headlights first with paint protection film. So every once in a while on Porsches, for some reason, you can pull the coating off of the headlight. It's not super common, but it's fairly common with Porsches. And then obviously you've ruined that headlight, and sometimes you can correct it by sanding it all down and then putting paint protection back over it after you buff it all back out, like it's an old headlight. But that's obviously a lot of work, and want to avoid that. So when I'm tacking this down, I'm not going to tack to the headlight. I'm going to tack to the bumper. All right, so it was important to make sure this is all free floating. If it's starting to tack anywhere, then you want to go ahead and lift it up and put some more rubbing alcohol, tack or slip solution underneath there. All right, trying to say one thing while I'm using another thing. Not working out well for me. Okay, so what we're trying to do, just make sure that there's no fingers going up this edge, and that, we've got a lot of the fingers out on this edge. This hood doesn't need a lot of stretch, and you don't want to put any more on it than's necessary, so less is better. I mean, I'm barely putting any stretch on this, really. It's not much at all. Okay. Once all the edges are glassed out and there's no more fingers, go ahead and tack this last corner. Now, every once in a while, when I'm stretching, I'll create a finger somewhere else, especially on vehicles that have a much more difficult hood and a lot more stretch. And then I'll go ahead and go to another corner and re-stretch that area. You can see here that because this is sitting a little bit proud of the hood, because the fender is, it just keeps popping back up. So we're going to take care of that here in a little bit. Now, once I've got the corners, all 4 corners tacked down, and everything's looking good as far as there being no fingers on the edges, I'm going to want to get rid of these bigger air pockets. So what I do is just take my arm and get rid of those. What happens with an air pocket when it sits there is that this part actually has no moisture touching it, so that part can start to dry. So when you go to squeegee this stuff out, you can tack that part down with air, then you get little air bubbles stuck in it. So getting rid of those big pockets right now helps avoid that, as well as there's another process that helps avoid that, and that is squeegeeing from the bottom all the way to the top. And I'll go ahead and we'll do that today as well. Now, if you're squeegeeing this down and you notice that the air pockets aren't leaving, then you can just lift up on this a little bit. That just means that your edge is starting to tack down a little bit. All right, and then we'll when I'm squeegeeing here, I'm actually leaving about half of this squeegee is pushing down new slip solution area, and then this half is overlapping. You want a really good overlap so you're not leaving any moisture behind. Alright, so these areas, I'm just going to squeegee like up to them and then leave all the water in them. And then we'll come back to that in a minute after we get everything squeegeed out. Now, when you're using this technique of starting at the bottom and squeegeeing up, obviously the gravity's working against you and the water is going to want to run back down. So you always want to make sure that you don't have like a pocket of water going down, then you start above and you leave a pocket of water here. The advantage to this technique is that this whole area, like this little air pocket, is full of water now. And so we don't have to worry about that spot being dry in that air pocket and then tacking down, because we're actually pushing a lot more water back into it. All right, so what we're gonna do, I'm gonna lift up a little bit here. I'm gonna fill that pocket with Tack solution. Do a little swipe and hold here. And basically what that's gonna do is help start getting the rest of this tack down so that it's not gonna move when I lift up and let go of this tension. All right, so we're gonna swipe that out and then we're gonna hold and then we're gonna release this tension. Then we're gonna push into the crevice between the two panels and hold that in there. And I'm putting a lot of pressure on the hood to make sure that tacks down real good and we don't have issues with it popping back up. All right, again, I'm gonna spray some of the tack solution into that last area that's not tacked on the hood. And actually, I think on this one, I like the idea better of tacking this edge down a bit because that other side was still pretty loose on here. All right, so now let's go ahead and deal with this part. I've already got the tack solution in there and I'm going to squeegee this out to the edge, hold that edge down and release this tension. And then we're going to tuck it in to the crevice between the two panels and hold. All right, great. Those edges are going to look great. They should stay down without an issue. Now let's see what we want to do next on this. We do need to take care of this spot on both sides as well. We're actually, a lot of times what I would do is if I had already put paint protection on these headlights, what I would probably do is put some alcohol, rubbing alcohol in here, tack solution, and I would swipe up and then hold on the headlight. And you see how that brings that down? But because I haven't put paint protection on these headlights yet and they're prone to having issues with the clear coat on them popping off, we're not gonna do that technique today. I don't wanna spend a bunch of hours trying to correct a problem I made. All right, so let's get some tack solution in there. And so that one I'm just gonna do a wrap and hold here. All right, then what I'm actually gonna do is trim this off a little bit. All right, now that we've got tack solution in there, we'll go ahead and this is basically just gonna be what we call a pre-wrap. Okay, let's take care of this other side. So another thing to note with this is that if you're popping this off of the tack right here, if you're if you're releasing this tension, you're trimming that, and then your material is moving, really what that means is you've got too much soap in there, or it's too much soap. It hasn't begun to tack yet. You would need to wait a little bit longer before you move on to doing this technique here. Really what I would do though is eliminate some of the soap from your install solution. It'll really help speed up your installs. So we've got all these edges are all down real good. I always go through and check. We've got a little bit popping up right here. Yeah, okay. So we'll probably do the same thing there then. And what we're gonna use here is a swipe and hold. All right, now do the swipe and hold. All right, now that we've got everything squeegeed out, just double check for water bubbles. Okay, all that looks good. Now we're gonna go ahead and trim these edges and do our pre-wrap. I don't like the idea of pulling that out of there just yet. Let's let that sit for a little bit longer. Now I'm gonna do another video on this hood where I do each one of these corners with a different technique. So we've got 6 corners, we'll have 6 different techniques, and we'll see, just show you some different ideas as far as how to tackle corners. So I'm not going to trim those exactly like I normally would. I'm going to leave those and trim them later, so I can decide which corner gets which technique. So again here we're leaving about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 inch. Here's another tip. Ramps also make great step stools when you're not using them. All right, let's go ahead and get that immediately kind of tucked right back in there. It's important that that edge doesn't pull up any of the edges really, because then wherever it comes up, you're gonna have a lift line there. All right, now that we've got all of this on, the edges are trimmed, next step is to do our pre-wrap. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna hit all these edges with the tack solution. Alright, so now we'll go ahead and do the pre-wrap. You see you're just swiping over that edge and then holding. And this takes your finished edge from being on the top while it dries to being on the side or on the bottom. I'm not going to come all the way to the corners on this one, although normally I would. But I didn't trim any of these corners because we're going to make another video here on how to do corners. All right, so we've got everything pre-wrapped and stuck down. I think I'm going to go ahead and take care of this before we lift it up and let this dry. All right, so we trim off the excess, and then this is all stuff that we're going to tack down. Fill that with the tack solution. On these Porsches, this is tough because that recess, it just takes longer than a lot of these because that recess is really sharp and dives in, and because it's got like these angles. On like a Mercedes, it's just round, so it's not quite as bad. Those get really tight, so you just want to make sure and get all the water and air out of there. I really appreciate you guys taking a look, and if you found something helpful, like and subscribe, leave a comment, and we'll see you on the next one.